Long nights and early mornings, feeling misunderstood and lonely, constant hard work and self-doubt. This is all part of having the courage to chase your dreams and become successful. Are you going to take the risk? I have, and it's worth it. Don't be afraid to take risk and fail. These are the experiences that will help you grow and evolve into a better version of yourself. Start today, be better tomorrow.
Welcome to the Guam podcast. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the host and guests, and not necessarily to Junior Achievement Guam or its affiliates.
Welcome to this week's podcast, and we have in the studio today Andrea Felder. She is a coder and she does amazing things helping people succeed. She works with marketing and sales companies remotely, and we're just going to finish our conversation on communication that we started last week. But before we do, I just want to say it's week 12, and I'm looking at the agenda. Currently, we're week 12, so I know you guys are all selling and as much as you can. Next week, or this week when you're seeing this podcast, it's all about conducting your board of directors meeting to liquidate your company and finalize your annual reports. So I know a bunch of you had some training with Jane and Jason regarding your financial statements for the annual report, but I just wanted to go back to what we were talking about last week. So good luck with your last minute sales and liquidation. So Andrea, we had the students talking or giving their demos and their sales pitches and all that kind of stuff. And the two things that came up was communication and time management. That they said that's been the biggest challenge. And the biggest challenge, the one of the things that's great about JA is that with this company program is that you get to bring in people from different schools and they intermingle, they've never met before and all that kind of stuff. So, sure. But the thing that was different this year is a lot of them never met each other. So it's just been online and it's trying to build, rapport and connection and community, whatever, online. So I thought, you do this all day long and you've done it for years and years with companies you've never been into and with people that you've never met, but you have this great community and great business. So I'm going to let you take it away and talk a little bit.
So, one of the things that I find really funny, especially lately, is that, when you're in more of like a technical marketing profession, you're very introspective and you don't like to be on camera. But some of it, especially when we're working remotely and you need to build that connection with people, you really have to be on camera. You have to connect. People have to understand your mannerisms and then feel comfortable with you as a person. And a lot of that is on video. So, and through, Slack, a lot of remote teams try to communicate very frequently, and every culture is different. So, for example, in one agency, we might use some form or version of Slack and then do daily team calls on Skype or on Zoom or whatever technology we're using. But in other agencies, it might be like a sprint call once a week and constantly on chat, via Slack. But the key is that you do have to invest your time in building a relationship with people that you work. Some people I haven't seen them and I've worked with them for 5-6 years and I never actually met them in person, which is interesting, but you trust them like they're your family. You spend so much time with them, and that daily communication is essential so that you all know what's going on, how each other are feeling, and even on the personal level, what are you experiencing in your daily life, So the only way to connect is to have to share that with others, and I think that's very important.
Now, do you have some kind of, we talk about icebreakers when the students are just starting, but when you started up, did you do that icebreaker?
It depends on like the size of your team, because some teams are really large, right? And then some are a lot smaller, so they're more intimate. So for example, if you're working on a 4 or 5 person team, then you have that luxury of being able to like share and do exercises and things of that nature, and everyone gets a little bit of time. But on larger teams, when you're like 50 plus people on a team, there are certain exercises you can do, but most of the time when we do it, especially on large calls, people are afraid to speak. Um, which is challenging because they don't want to speak. They don't want people to see their face. They don't know what to say. So what we do is we always open the floor, and say, we kind of like say, you have to speak, so it's your turn. Go ahead and share something funny, or we'll do something cool like, let's work on building the culture. What are your interests? Share it on a sheet so that people can see like learn more about you, even if they don't actually have to speak to you, right? So it's kind of like a bio interest sheet or something like that. And then in other cases, we'll do something more culture oriented. We'll try to create an exercise where it's going to be an output or a content deliverable, and everyone has to put a piece in it like about themselves. So maybe it's your favorite song, maybe it's the favorite dish that you like to eat, or maybe it's like a selfie of something that's like no one expects you to do, like riding a motorcycle, or you know, swimming at this beautiful like resort location. So you get a chance to share who you are without actually having to speak to people. And it's kind of fascinating, because what happens is when you're remote, everyone feels like they're just kind of like a number, like they're just someone dialing into the Zoom meeting, and someone you see is like text on a screen, and maybe for 5 minutes their face. But when you see what they actually do outside of Zoom or outside of the internet, like this person's a surfer, or oh, this person has 2 dogs, then it becomes like, oh, you can relate on that level, because something a little bit more personal about them, even if it's like 100-person team. So that's very helpful.
Kind of like buoying into Facebook and just kind of checking out what kind of stuff they post, right?
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is with remote people, what I found, especially when after like you've been working remotely for over a year, you start turning all your profiles to private, because you don't necessarily want everyone in your team to see what you're doing sometimes, or you just want more of a private life, and then you get inundated with that like social atmosphere where you're kind of more aware that all these platforms are collecting sort of data on you. So you start to like become more private and enclosed. And I found that most people even people who work in like social startups and like their accounts are private, especially even CEOs, things like that. They don't normally use social media as you'd expect. So it's kind of like the whole Mark Zuckerberg scenario where he puts a tape on his camera, because he knows that, there's just so much data that's public that you kind of want to be a little bit more private. So when you work remotely, you're a little bit more conscious of that. It happens, basically.
But at the same time, do people just open 2 accounts?
Yeah, sometimes, depending. So they'll have a fake account, and then a more private, like a public-facing account, which is challenging. But I typically find that on LinkedIn, it's always public-facing. That's your place for professionalism. And then on Facebook, people usually, and Instagram, if they want to keep their private lives personal, they'll just set it to private.
For me, Facebook was my way of keeping up with family and friends in the States. And that's all it was. And then all of a sudden I, took a friend request here and there or whatever. Now I got everybody. So it's kind of like, it gets to be huge.
Kind of gets mixed up, right?
Mm-hmm. No. And so I just, and so I created a business account, but I end up not putting a whole lot in there. So the people that you haven't met before, physically or whatever, would you ever get the chance to meet them?
Yeah, some people I've ended up meeting over time, but most of it, since it's more professional, like you might meet them at a conference, or you might meet them on a call, or on social media. But you don't necessarily have to meet that person in person, because you're developing this one-on-one relationship, and having those interpersonal skills are very helpful if you're building a remote team or working in one right now. So that's becoming very common.
So how do you handle conflict?
Oh, okay. Give me an example. This is fun scenario.
I'm going to think you're working on a project, and one of the team members either isn't showing up on the calls or just isn't getting it done. Or, I mean, and you can answer all these because someone could be pushing back on you or,
Sure.
just, I want to just say being the rebel, but, that kind of thing. What would you do differently or what would you change there?
For example, like the most basic scenario is someone doesn't show up on a call, right? Now, one of the things that will guide how you deal with that is the type of culture that you're building, right? So first and foremost, the inception when the team is first built is, or just onboarding someone new, is you have to set the expectation and standard. These are the things that you agree to do. If you don't agree to do that, then you can't really work here because you have to come to these meetings at this time and so on and so forth. And typically, remote CEOs set those standards up front, or hiring managers as well. If someone does not show up to the call, usually that's the part of culture where it's kind of sensitive because when you're doing remote work, everyone is more time independent, right? So they feel like they want to own more of their time. And then coordinating across different time zones can be a challenge. So once you work through, is this person not available during this time zone? Is that the problem? Or is it that they're having problems accessing technology and they need some like training on that and that's the issue? Or is it like an internet connection issue? Like first you identify the problem, right? Once you know what their actual problem is, if it's something that you can accommodate, you do that. Otherwise, you just let the person know, hey, it's not going to work out if you're not present during our calls because calls are very important, right? And every organization will have a different like standard for calls. So some organizations I've worked with, they have a call every single morning because they need to check in and it's kind of like lean and more agile. And other organizations, it's once at the beginning of the week so we can see what the progress is for that week prior. So everyone is different. And then they also use different tools for time management. So maybe a call might not necessarily be essential. You can communicate through video and email. However, they'll use like time tracking technology to know when you're in and when you're out. That way, if someone really wants to speak to you, they can look at that time tracker and say, okay, this person is in at this time and they are out at this time. So it just really depends on how you want to manage your culture. If you really want to like take attendance per se, or you just want to know when someone is available to jump on a call. So,
okay. And just a couple things. So culture is basically how things are done around here. And, I mean, we talk about cultures between, Asian and American and maybe, South America, whatever. I mean, everybody has a different culture. But it's really about what kind of rules or what kind of behaviors that we accept around here. What do we believe? All that kind of stuff. So just to make sure everyone understands what, you mean by culture. And it's usually led by the leaders, right? The leaders kind of set it up. And you also said about expectation and standards. And the students put together a bylaws and say what's happening. And they can say, if you miss so many meetings, you're out and that kind of stuff. But I think same thing with expectations and standards. Same thing in that what you tolerate is what you get. So if you say this happens, you need to be able to follow it. And there's always exceptions to the rules. Do you normally always able to find a resolution for a conflict of time or something like that? Or is it sometimes we got to find somebody else for the position?
A lot of times it's you have to find someone else. So hiring in a remote environment, the standard is very important, but I just want to emphasize what you emphasized was that following through is almost even more important than the standard you set in the beginning. Because what happens is, like you said, if you tolerate the constant absences, the constant like I'm not available at this time or I can't complete this task that someone's waiting for, then it becomes a culture of like just kind of mediocrity, essentially. Like you're just going with the flow. And then what happens after 3 or 4 times you've done that, and then all of a sudden now you're like, well, we want to enforce the standards here. Well, that won't fly because you're a little too late. You weren't disciplined enough to reinforce that while it was happening. You waited, and as a result, everyone is suffering. So when we look at like the reason why I would say at the beginning, you just cut it off at the head is because if you can't find a solution or a resolution, just stop it there because it impacts not just one person. When one person is waiting on you, it impacts like the entire team. That prevents us from being agile. It prevents us from putting out things that we need to complete. And if really there's like a cog in the wheel, you need to stop it at the beginning. Otherwise, it's not a valid argument when you say, well, you missed five and you've broken our standards or our bylaws. Well, how come that wasn't reinforced in the beginning? And then it hurts the culture because there's other people that are following the rules and giving their time and being disciplined. And then there's someone in the back end that's kind of like slowing things down for you. So.
And then it becomes favoritisms and all the other stuff. And that's where conflict arises. There's loss of trust and, people aren't as committed anymore. I mean, I talk about, disengagement of employees, and that's where people stop to engage. If everybody's not on the same
wavelength, then
same wavelength, have the same goal. It's kind of like you got to be committed, and if you're not committed, or if you don't have everybody committed to the same thing, they kind of step out.
And I think that's not really a reflection of the person itself, because in the beginning, everyone might like have the same passion for something, or might love that environment and want to do amazing things together. But life is always, moving, right? So there's always things going on. I know one of the people I really admire in terms of like lean management of building a lean business, right? I did ask him one day, and I said, how do you build? What do you think about remote teams? Because this is prior to the pandemic and COVID, and remote teams are not as common like 5 years ago, right? So I'm like, hey, what do you think about remote teams? And he's like, the thing about building a remote team is that it's very challenging, and most people don't realize how challenging it is to be in sync. So building you have to have like a strong respect for the people that you work with. You have to have a strong respect for their time, and then you also have to be flexible, because life happens in the process. I might be running late because I have to run to the airport or pick up my child, and so communication becomes the glue that keeps you together, right? Because things happen in life, but if you can articulate that, whether it's through chat or whether it's on a call, you should do that, because on the other end, someone is experiencing something really different, and they're not in the same room to see you run out the door because something happens, or to see you pick up a call because there's an emergency. So communication becomes like that glue that keeps you together. But it's very hard.
Yeah. Now, one of the things, because I do a lot of workshops online, and, the whole thing about video is so you can see each other, right? We don't have, especially with the social distancing and everything. And I've been using, Skype or iSight or something like that for years and years and years, communicating with family back in Michigan. But, now it's like, what do you do about people who don't want to turn their camera on? Do you make it, is it a mandatory thing that cameras should be on, or do you let them sit? Because
it depends.
I was saying, I remember remote calls where it's so easy if you're just listening on the phone. If there's not a camera, when somebody's talking, it's so easy to drift off and just kind of be dabbling over here or talking, say So, anyways, the answer.
Yeah. So there are situations. It depends on the people that you're communicating with. So if you have typically CEOs will do this most of the time if they feel like they're disconnected, or hiring managers or managers in the same room, they feel disconnected. So if I feel like I'm on an hour training call and you're disengaged, I'm going to ask you to put your camera on, right? And it's very similar to education as well. They want their camera on so they can see that the students are engaged and not just like sleeping, which is something that you do need to be cognizant of. However, if it's like a more personal team and everyone's like known each other for years and everyone feels like, okay, I really don't need to have my camera on, the CEO may be a little bit more flexible. But you have to look at the level of the people that you're dealing with and their attention span, and whether or not they respect your time enough to pay attention to this like short call, right? So if they're engaged and they're trying to problem solve and they're actually speaking up, then sometimes it's not necessarily a mandatory thing. But on other occasions, there are reasons why you can't actually be on camera for a remote team. So you might be traveling and you don't have really good Wi-Fi, and basically Zoom is like one of those things where it's a very heavy load as Skype as well. So there's reasons where you may not need or you just can't be on camera, and that's acceptable. Though you always try to do what you can if it's mandatory, right? So.
Okay. Um, how about time management?
Oh.
Yeah. And I'm kind of thinking, between communication, time management, how long is too long online? I mean, I've just happened to be start at 1 o'clock in the morning and end at 9 in the morning. So, and I'm fine. Where other people say, oh no, more than 2 hours is, whatever. And it's it kind of depends on what's
Going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends.
So how long do you normally keep your meetings, or what's the longest meetings you keep?
So if it depends on what the purpose is. If it's like a check-in, it's usually like 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. And that's really not to go over anything specific. It's more like, is there anything that we need to know? And if it's a training session, it usually lasts for about 2 hours. But there are instances in which, like, my meetings have lasted 9 hours. And those are very specific use cases, sometimes 4 hours. But it's usually like training or problem solving, or maybe you're doing a sprint and you're just live working together. That has also been the case. So it really depends on what you're doing, right? So, and who you're doing it with. Some people can only withstand, 1 or 2 hours, but other people can just stay on all day. And of course, you can have little breaks in between, like just to manage that, get up, stretch, or something like that. Yeah.
Now, with COVID, because this is new and we're doing it, virtual, and you've been doing this for a while, do you ever kind of think, wow, these guys are finally, or they're finding the secret? Because like you're global. You've been working with global teams, for the past, 5 years. So it's no big deal to be working with somebody in, Africa, and then somebody over in the States, and somebody in, England, and, Berlin, and, whatever. Right.
Yeah.
So do you kind of think like the secret's out? And, it is, it's like, these students, one of the things that people talk to the students about is that now your product, you can sell it anywhere, because we have local trade fairs and local whatever. And it's like, you can do, it's a global platform, and it's been a global platform, but this is like forcing people into realize it is a global platform.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like the pandemic has like sped up remote lifestyles, just because everyone who previously did say that, oh, that's not feasible, or why would we do that? Now they're forced to actually think on that level, and then like embrace the benefits, and then problem solve for things that are actually problems, which are very few in terms of communication, just because, and just building a business in general, or operating on a global level, even if it's not a business, it's an organization. The thing is, maybe 10 years ago it was not as easy, but now like the technology has advanced enough where it's almost seamless. Like it kind of just makes a little bit more sense. For a business person, you're shaving off the time it goes to work, it takes to go to work, you're shaving off lunchtime. I mean, you can still give people lunch obviously, but like, there's not much traveling that's required because you're at home, go to your refrigerator or whatever, but it just makes someone a little bit more productive. And it uses a lot less like resources. So if I were to compare a remote team to like an actual traditional brick and mortar business or organization, there's a lot of bloat in the traditional brick and mortar, because you're paying for everything. You're paying for your employees, their expenses, their insurance, things like that, retirement contributions, and then you're paying for the actual building and you're paying for all the assets within the building. And if you're a remote team, you might have like technology expense, or you might have like a remote office expense, but it's definitely not as large as the actual building itself. And so business owners can take advantage of that. And then one of the things I think is like even more advantageous is that you get to work anywhere, from anywhere, with anyone. So now the motivation to work is not necessarily restricted to, I have to work in Guam because I'm from Guam, I have to work in Japan because I'm from Japan. Now I can look at an agency halfway across the world and say, I'd like to work with these people because they're doing something that I believe in, and
They
working
have a great
is,
culture. Yeah.
yeah, like, so you're motivated beyond just the money. Now you can choose. I always say this, which is funny, is like you can choose whatever you want to be, and you can do whatever it is you want. There are no limitations. So you'll be hard pressed to find a limitation, to be honest
Right.
with you.
Yeah. I mean, I always believe that, you know, it's what I even tell people when they're interviewing for a job. It's like as much as the company is interviewing you, you're interviewing the company.
You're interviewing
So
them, yeah.
yeah, and so I was really blessed right out of college. I went to work for Ford Motor Company. And the thing about Ford Motor Company, they loved me because I worked in motorcycle shops and, worked in a parts department and, service department. And they just loved that.
Yeah,
And that's the only job I ever applied for. And I got it, whatever. I mean, that's just kind of been the trajectory ever since. But it was one of those things, I was interviewing them just as much, but, because I want to see how much training they're going to give me, how much, possibly travel, what are the benefits? And it's kind of like, I tell people, it's like, you just paid for your education. Now somebody can pay and educate me. So I'm going to get
even
paid
further.
and they're going to
Yeah,
educate me because it is the experience that you get, especially in that first 10 years of your career or so. So you want to get your best practices from, great organizations and cultures and stuff like that.
exactly.
So,
Yeah. I
yeah,
resonate with that completely because there are instances in which I work with agencies and they're ready to hire, but the conversation is always like, well, what are we going to learn and what type of projects are we going to work on,
right.
and what type of like work environment is it, so is it like, because my work situation is a little different. I call it work, but it's more like contracting with businesses, and there's a lot of like negotiation that takes place. Sometimes it's a partnership, other times it is like a contract situation. Other times, it's kind of like the prospect of learning something new and building something new. And that to me has always been the bigger motivation, like what can I do that's different? And what can I learn that's different from what I've already done? And my job is, while I can code, and I'm pretty good at it, I found that my genius is more like having like the full circle of trying to figure out how things will work and what actually increases the bottom line, so what will move the needle for online businesses. And most of the time it's transitioning from like a traditional agency into like the online or e-com market, which is what I like find more fascinating. So I'll work with companies like marketing agencies in Florida, and they're probably award-winning agencies traditionally, right? um, they've won Addy Awards and things like that, but they don't necessarily know how to operate online. And so it's kind of like a quick start for them, because what it would take them 2 weeks would take us, and people like me, like 1 or 2 days, right? And so that's kind of the
You have
interesting
more
part of
control?
seeing. No, but it's interesting because you get to see like how it's done traditionally, and then you can speed up the process. So it's always looking for ways to learn more and how to. It's a communication game online,
Right,
because you really have to know what you have to listen very carefully to listen to what the person needs, and you can't be quick to speak and think you have the solution. It's
right,
always different for every organization. So I think that if someone wanted to build like a remote career, the skill that would be incredibly valuable is listening. So being intuitive, understanding how to read between the lines and communicate, see what someone might need and they're not actually saying it. And those are very helpful skills, it works well in a traditional environment, but it's very important in a remote environment.
and I'm going to say that's to me, I remember somebody, saying this before. It's like, oh, 80% of communication is body language. And you can
Mm,
read somebody's face, their hand styles, and, because
yeah.
behavior is going to talk about what their styles are like. And it was really funny because the person would never want to get on Skype calls. This was back in Skype,
Oh,
popular one.
yeah.
Would never want to get on Skype calls and whatever. And then, I mean, I had, there was an issue with the individual, and I just kind of said, well, I think part of the problem is that we're broken. We see each other 3 days a year, and
Uh,
hammer, 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 whatever. And it's like, and I know I wouldn't have been talked to or treated the way I was treated often if he had to see me, look me in the eyes, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like all of a sudden it's really easy to, it's like, in an email when it's, all capital letters, people say that's kind of like, harsh or whatever. And so it's the same thing with a phone call. If somebody can be really short and whatever with you, but if they have to see your face and, you say something, and you're sitting there like, what the heck?
Did you actually just say that, right? Like, did you?
Yeah, and so I
really
said, that was fine. And the funny thing is that the comment back was, well, you're saying that it's partially my fault then. And I was just like, yeah.
Communication is a two-way street, right?
Because the body language, like you said, says a lot of the stuff that's not verbally said, right? So that's kind of like, it's kind of listening to not what's being said, right? So I know the listening is a big thing.
I mean, listening. Let's talk about this like in just a little bit, like in a remote environment, because honestly, I will say that a lot of people just really absolutely disdain like getting on camera. Like they just don't like it. They barely like to be on calls. It's a lot to do with that time independence. So, which is frustrating because sometimes it can take like 5 minutes to talk about something that took 2 hours to resolve through email. However, that is sometimes a landscape, right? Like sometimes you're dealing with a team that just doesn't really like to get on a call. They just want to talk or send their emails, and that's pretty much it. And in that case, there's certain etiquette, like there's an etiquette to online chat that it digs deeper into emotion, which is surprising, right? Like, so there are things, if you are in a Slack group, which a lot of the kids these days use Discord, so that might be a little bit more familiar for them. But if you're in a Slack group and someone asks you for something, you need to acknowledge, like with an emoji, like, hey, I check mark, I got it, I see this, or just like how long does it take you to respond to someone, right? Like, what is the standard? Should it be like 15 minutes, 30 minutes? Like, if your boss is asking you a question and he's waiting around for like 2-3 hours, that's a problem, right? So there's certain types of etiquette that everyone needs to be aware of, especially within the team. Like, do we use emojis to respond? Is that acceptable? In a remote workforce where you're dealing on a global level, like how do you interact with someone who shares a different holiday, like EID? Do you say, congratulations, or I hope you enjoy your celebration? If you're not necessarily celebrating that holiday, how do you engage? So there's a lot of like little nuances that you have to observe every culture to see if that's something that they do. So if they invite you to your Slack group, instead of like just jumping in automatically, it's really helpful to like look over the channels. How do these people talk to each other? Do they like use emojis frequently? Or if someone announces something, do they all say something and respond? Or is it okay to just like, oh, that's cool?
Yeah. So okay, well, you know what? We're hitting 30 minutes, and I said we'd try to keep down to 30 minutes. And I love the conversation because I know we can go on and on about this.
I know.
the one thing I do want to talk about, or just close with this, is with internet, with everything going on, with I just say with internet and people going online or whatever. And I know you have some young children at home. So your whole thing with teaching your kids how to code, how important is it for people to learn how to code, even if it's is a little bit help, or you don't really need to know it unless you're going to go all in, or just
okay. So here's the this is a great question. Yeah, here's a great question to end the whole conversation here, which is everyone should know, if you're a child, if you're below the age of 18, if you're in college and you have the mental bandwidth to learn how to code, do it. There's so many different areas of language. Like I do well with design and HTML, CSS, things like that. But there's like a higher level, which is like more programming and things of that nature. Whatever you gravitate towards, you should learn. Whether or not you feel like you're going to immediately use it, the reality is the world is becoming more technical. So whether you're in nursing, whether you're in teaching, whether whatever profession you decide to take on will require a little bit of coding. And if it doesn't require, you're more valuable because you know how to do it. Um, and that's my gist. So yes, the kids learn code. There's I think Guam has a little bit of a group, Free Code Camp, Free Code Camp here in Guam. So I know they have a Facebook group, and it's free online. You can take it. There's a bunch of free apps and free programs. I would do that if you don't know how to code and you want to, but you just absolutely should. Like it's like no question in my mind, just because. Even if it's not something you're going to use in your immediate field, you might be a lawyer. Well, you might find some use for it later, but the world is definitely going to be more technical, and your knowledge in coding will make you more valuable all around anyway. So
sometimes you just know what questions you might want to ask of somebody. You don't have to be the expert, but you know what kind of questions, just to see how good they actually might be. You know?
Yeah.
It's like,
so like for example,
coding, and they've done it for 6 months.
yeah. I mean, here's the thing: is these days I don't find myself coding as much, and most of the CEOs who know how to code, they don't really find themselves coding as much. You hire your development team, but the bigger thing, if you're like really focused on building your business online or building an organization or marketing, whatever it is, building an app, the code is really not the skill that you're learning; it's the problem solving. So. Knowing how all these pieces work together, how you can architect something that you're building, that's a far more important skill than like knowing how to put an anchor link into something. So if you can like be the visionary and like put the puzzle together, you're more valuable, but you need to know the code. You need to know how it works, because you need to be fluent in the language to know if it's actually possible, or like what are the requirements, how do you build that out. So being fluent in code is not just going to help you with the actual code. It'll help you be the entrepreneur. It'll help you be the business person, the manager, like the requirements expert. It just helps you all around. So if you're building a business and that's something you're interested in, you need to know how to code. One thing is, you really don't want to get screwed, because like as a business owner, you need to know how it works, right? So you're going to put all these pieces together, but you also need to know, how much does it cost? How much does it really cost me? Because you can run into some random Tom, Dick, and Harry, and they say, yeah, I can build you an app, I can build you a website, but like unless you know the details of what it actually costs you, what it takes to build it, then outline the requirements, then you can say, okay, this is how much it should actually cost. And that's a smart route for any business person trying to build something, to know how much it costs and what it's going to take.
Yeah. So okay,
I get excited about that. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm glad, but I'm gonna stop, because I have like 3 or 4 more questions just on that. But I'm gonna stop, because otherwise we will go to 45 to an hour, and I keep on saying I gotta keep it
down.
But I really appreciate you. Just back to the students again. Good luck on your liquidation. I'm excited to see what gets done. Presentation. So seriously, work on those and practice, because you want those to be somewhat seamless. And those are the ones, what people see. It's kind of like even Andrea would say is, what people see, because you're not going to be in person and the interview's going to work. Remember, your environment, how you show up on camera is going to be how you show up other places. That you're going to just make that as assumptions. So good luck, and good selling and great liquidation. So thank you very much. Thanks, Andrea. It was awesome to talk to you, as it always is.
Thanks, and good luck, everyone. Bye.
Okay.